Perk, they never had sex with me. Master, that was what I was told to call the man. Told me I was too young, but when I was old enough he would enjoy me. Then he just laughed. I looked at her lying in her blood and wondered why I didn't feel anything at all. I just killed a woman and I felt absolutely nothing. Good, that was a good thing, I told myself. I left the room and quietly snuck upstairs. I found myself in a beautiful home and there was no sign of Master. The home was huge and so beautifully decorated. I couldn't believe these two monsters lived here. I found the kitchen and Mistress's purse on the counter. I grabbed it, opened the back door and ran out into the night. I was alone in the woods somewhere in the country, completely naked. I alternated between walking and running until the sun started to come up. I spotted an old farmhouse with clothesline in their backyard. On it hung a ratty old bathrobe, which I grabbed and put on. It was the first time I had clothes on in years. It smelled of baby powder and apples, like my mother smelled. I felt safe in it. I wanted to stop at the house and call for help, but I couldn't. These were country people. They might be friends of Master, or Master might be watching the house for me to arrive. I was convinced that anyone who saw me would grab me and take me right back to them. I was so scared. I snuck away into the woods. Later, I found a place to hide and started looking in her purse. It had the usual women's stuff in her wallet. The wallet had nothing but money in it, a couple of $1,000 and $100 bills, but no identification of any kind. I wandered around in the woods for days. If no one ever saw me or found me, my kidnappers wouldn't either. Every time I came near a house, I hid until nightfall. If no one was home, I snuck into the house. Most folks out in the country don't really lock their doors, and I'm good with dogs. I took some food, never enough to get noticed, some of the woman's clothes if they fit. I took stuff from the back of their closet which appeared as if they were not worn very often. I found an old backpack in a garbage can at one house and took it to keep my stuff together. I kept walking the whole time, cleaning myself in small springs and farm ponds. I gradually felt safer, but not safe enough to go to the police for help. Not safe enough to try to do anything, but to keep getting further and further away. Percy just stared at her. Don't look at me like that. I wasn't thinking right. I just had to get away, and making a phone call and waiting for the police would not get me far away. That's the only logic I could make at that time. Now that I know you, I realize how dumb I've been, running and hiding all this time. Finally, I found the interstate. It was my ticket to freedom. I waited for dark and started walking down the side of the highway. Every time I heard a vehicle, I hid in the tall grass at the roadside. After walking all night, I came to a rest area/truck stop. Under the cover of fading darkness, I climbed under the tarp on a flatbed trailer. I was huddled between some big machines when a voice told me to get out of his truck. The driver had returned. I crawled out from under the tarp and started crying. He was looking at me funny, like if I ran he'd stop me. I just kept backing away and backing away. Then I fell, tripped over something. He came at me and I thought he was going to kill me or take me or something. I started screaming and kicking, trying to get away. But then he did the strangest thing. He started singing, "Hush little baby, don't say a word. Papa's gonna buy you a mockingbird." My grandpa sang that to me. I can still remember. I stopped struggling and just listened to him sing the whole song, and when I looked at his face, I thought he was crying. He told me he wasn't going to hurt me or let anyone hurt me. I don't know, something just kind of fell into place and I trusted him. He said, "You must be running from something terrible." Just like that. Just like he could tell by how scared I was. I nodded. He looked at my clothes and the dirt on my arms and face. "Get cleaned up in the ladies' room. I'll be right outside here. You're safe now." He took my backpack and pointed to the right side of the building. It took me a long time to convince myself not to run again. This guy could get me pretty far from here, and that's what I wanted more than anything else. It took about 15 minutes, but I was a little more presentable. Getting back to the truck, he helped me climb in the passenger side. I huddled against the door, scared to death. Now that I was in his truck and not able to run was all I wanted to do. He said I reminded him of his granddaughter, and I would be safe with him. He told me all about her. She was a cheerleader and wanted to go to college to study microbiology. I tried to pay attention, but my eyes would not stay open. He pointed to the back where there was a sleeper compartment set up, said I was welcome to crash, and he'd keep driving till I woke up. I figured as long as I heard and felt the truck moving, I'd be okay, and I was. When I woke up just before sunset, he asked if I was hungry. He pulled into a rest stop and I ate the first real food since I was kidnapped, so very long ago. Before I could get back to the truck, my stomach rebelled at the food. John, my truck driver, helped me into the truck, and then went into the rest stop and brought back some clear broth. That cup stayed down, so he went and got more. Later that night, he dropped me off in this city, said he'd be passing by again next month, and told me to call if I needed another ride somewhere as he gave me his cell number. So, I started my life again in the apartment building where I first met Betty. First John the trucker found me, and now you found me. Thank you, Perk. I really don't want to keep running, she said. Jenny then fell asleep in Percy's lap. She was exhausted by reliving all those horrors. Percy sat in the dark with Jenny's head in his lap. He thought about her story. He wished it wasn't true, because that meant there was a serial killer in their neighborhood. And that killer had been operating undetected for years. Unknown to Jenny, Percy had tape recorded her tale. At work, he would start checking her story. If these people existed, they had to be stopped. Then he remembered Betty. Was she assaulted and murdered because she resembled Jenny? The next afternoon, Jenny and Percy went to the pistol range. She was a quick learner. She soon was hitting the target repeatedly. When they got home, he gave her an illegal gun he owned and showed her how to use it. At work Monday, he refused an assignment which caught his Capitan's eye and Percy was called into the office. Percy started out by saying, "I think we have a serial killer operating in the area, Bill." The Capitan started feeling a sickness in his stomach. He knew Percy would not make that kind of a statement unless he was 90% sure. "Capitan, I've got a few more facts to check before I'm 100%. But it looks as if they are kidnapping the homeless and then torturing them to death. I don't know what they are doing to the bodies because they are not turning up," Percy went on. "Perk, if this turns out to be true, we'll need to call in the big boys. It's too much for our guys to handle." "Yeah, I know I don't want to end my career with one of these cases unsolved." Percy played the tape for the Bill. After 4 hours, Bill said, "Jesus H. Christ. Are you sure you want this kid with you? We're going to need her intact, you know. Don't screw her up." "That would be my goal as well. She's just a kid." "Really? A scared kid with no family anymore, and she seems like she trusts me. That's what I meant when I said don't mess her up. Don't let her down. If you can't handle this, we have resources for kids like her. And just to be on the safe side, get her in to see victim advocates. Has she even seen a doctor yet?" Bill handed me the forms required for victim advocates, so her medical expenditures would be somewhat covered. "No, didn't cross my mind until she told her tale, and now she says it's too late, everything is all healed up. Just the same, I'll get some chest x-rays to corroborate the repeated blows to her chest, see if any other bones have recently been broken and healed. Sexual assault kit's not going to show anything, but just the same, she should get checked." Percy returned to his desk. It was time to go to work, checking Jenny's story. The first thing he did was check Jenny's name against the missing persons database. He got a hit. A girl named Jenny was reported missing by her parents in the next large city one state over, after a trip to the mall. The girl matched Jenny's description. He sent for the pictures of the missing girl that the report indicated were there. Next, he checked for an auto accident report from the time Jenny indicated she saw in the newspaper. He found the accident report. It indicated that 3 individuals died in a one-car accident. Their last names matched Jenny's. Percy read the report carefully. The CSI writing in one section indicated he felt that the car had been forced off the road and into that ravine, but could find no positive proof. The CSI marked the death, suspicions, and signed off. No one followed up on the report at the time. He wrote up his findings and knocked off for the day. As Percy was walking in the door, the phone started ringing. Caller ID, City Police. They were calling him with another case. He let it go to voicemail. He needed to evaluate Jenny's state before he took another case. Jenny came running out of the kitchen, wiping her hands on a towel. As she started to greet him, the voicemail tone went off on his phone. She lost her smile and said, "Is it the station?" He nodded. "Well, answer it. I'll put the food in the refrigerator and we can eat it later," she said softly. He started to protest, but was interrupted. "Will you be very long, do you think?" Jenny wrapped her arms around her waist. "Won't know until I call in. I'll just ignore it for a while. Seems like putting it off might only make it worse. Just answer it and go get started. The sooner you start, the sooner you can be back home." Jenny squared her shoulders and stood like she was ready to take a hit. "I'm really sorry, Jenny," he said as he fished out his phone and dialed the numbers. It was a triple homicide. When Percy arrived at the large home in an upper-middle-class neighborhood, he knew this was the crime scene without looking up the address. There were 2 TV trucks, a couple of reporters that he recognized in a crowd of people. There were more police vehicles in the street and on the lawn than in the headquarters parking lot at shift change. The patrol officers were trying to put up the yellow crime scene tape and control a crowd that wanted to look around. He was greeted by a CSI sergeant. "Hi, Sherlock. We got us a messy one here." There are 3 bodies in the master bedroom, all shot with a large handgun multiple times. I hope you haven't eaten because the large caliber gun made a mess of the victims. Percy thought, just my luck. There goes having dinner with Jenny tonight. As I climbed the stairs, I dialed home. Jenny, don't wait to have dinner with me. I won't be home until very late tonight or early in the morning. He could hear the tension in her voice as she said, I'll miss you. Please come home to me as soon as you can. I need you to hold me again. He promised he would try. Master sat in his little room and remembered. He had spotted some black guys trying to talk girls into starring in home movies. Most of the girls turned them down or wanted money. Master followed the guys and found they had a small house in a bad neighborhood. The nearest houses were vacant and boarded up. The house offered enough privacy that he could play with both guys. One night, they brought a white girl home with them. He watched as they carried her drugged body into the house. He waited. The lights in one of the upstairs bedrooms went on. Soon Master saw the bright light start. He knew they were filming. It was now time to begin the fun, and he started up the stairs. He followed the CSI into the master bedroom. It was bad. He almost turned around and walked out. He looked at the patrol commander and said, only the guys with extra strong stomachs. I don't want to see them vomit all over the place. The coroner's guys were already there and covering the bodies. There were 2 on the bed covered with one sheet. One body was on top of the other. He thought, I guess I know what they were doing. The 3rd body was on the floor by a camera tripod. The camera was missing. My CSI saw my look and remarked, it was still running when we got here. I sent it back to the lab to process the tape and see if we got lucky. My captain arrived just as I was pulling the sheet off the couple on the bed. The guy on top was black. The woman on the bottom was white. At first glance, it looked as if they were having sex when killed. But something was wrong with what I was looking at. Then it registered in my brain. His male parts were missing. I heard my captain say, shit, it's the mayor's daughter. I now knew where my priorities were. Helping Jenny just went on the back burner. I shifted into high gear and started giving orders, identify every car in the driveway and on the street, start a canvass of the neighborhood, get me the results on the video, find out who owns this house. My captain got on the phone to the chief. It was decided the chief would inform the mayor. That was one job I didn't want. After CSIs were done with the bedroom, I released the bodies to the coroner for their trip to the morgue. They bagged the bodies and transferred them to the station wagons. The news guys went crazy taking pictures of the 3 bags. The chief staged an impromptu news conference. He told the news people what a great job he was doing and that he would be running for re-election in the fall. The pig then turned the news conference over to me. I didn't have anything to give them, so I just gave them bullshit answers. The seasoned news people knew I had nothing and grilled me for an extra 30 minutes just to be mean. The sun was just starting to rise when I left the scene. I had a pretty good idea of what went down. The girl was drugged. The 2 black guys were filming sex with her, so they could use the tape to blackmail the mayor. It fit. Now all I had to do was figure out who killed them and why. My mind said, I'll bet it's a jealous boyfriend or husband who caught them and went nuts. I went home. On my kitchen table was a note from Jenny. Kate called. There is a problem with your son. I told her you were out on a case. She demanded you call her tonight. I tried to stay up and wait for you but got too tired and went to bed. Please join me. I need a hug. Love. Jenny. I know how to follow orders. I went to bed and cuddled. I knew what my priorities were. Kate could wait until tomorrow. I was awaked by Jenny's loud voice on the phone. You can't talk to him. He was on the case all night. I guess he got in between 5 o'clock and 6 o'clock this morning. The yelling was still going on as I walked into the kitchen. I took the phone from Jenny and said, What the hell do you want, Kate? I'm your chief of police, and who the hell is Kate? I suspected I wasn't on his speed dial. He had never called before. Sorry, sir. I thought you were my ex-wife. Holmes, I want you in my office in 1 hour. The shit has hit the fan, was the answer I got. By the time I got back to my bedroom, Jenny had clean clothes for me all laid out and a hot cup of coffee on my dresser. A little voice asked through the door, Are you decent? And can I come in? I have breakfast. She had made me an omelet and toast. She fed me while I dressed. I made it to the chief's office with 5 minutes to spare and heartburn from eating and drinking my coffee too fast. I wasn't in the best of moods. Little did I know this was the high point of my day. The rest would turn to shit. In the chief's office there was the mayor, the medical examiner, the DA, my captain, 2 gentlemen I later learned were FBI special detail, Sam the forensic captain. When I walked in, they all stopped talking. Something's really wrong, I thought. I was introduced to the FBI guys. One of them smiled and said, Any relation? Well, you can guess my answer. Then he added, We're part of the unit that catches serial killers. We've heard you might have one. I do have one, but I'm just getting the information together, so we can call you. What has that got to do with this case? I humbly asked. They all started talking at once until the chief held up his hands. One at a time, please, starting with forensics, was all he said. Forensics started. The bodies on the bed were staged. It seems the guys were killed first. The girl had been drugged, and then was brutally assaulted and killed. Then she was shot, post-mortem to look as if she was killed along with the rest of them. The videotape? I asked. Nada, was the reply. It was typical homemade style porn. It stopped just before the guys were killed and was restarted after the bodies were arranged back on the bed. We are still going over the room looking harder now, but I don't expect to find anything. Sherlock, this guy is good. Can we have the videotape and send it to our lab? Asked one of the FBI guys. An evidence bag with the tape in it slid down the table toward him. Good luck, was added. The me started talking next. The guy you refer to as the cameraman was also shot post-mortem. He was actually died of a broken neck. Whoever broke his neck was very strong. The victim's head was nearly torn off. Only the skin on the neck kept the head from falling off. It's almost as if the head was twisted around in a complete circle and then returned to its normal position. The man on the bed was also dead before he was shot. It appears he was punched in the chest hard enough to burst his heart. I'll know more if his genitals are ever recovered. The girl is another story. Mr. Mayor, I suggest you step out of the room for this part. The me looked down waiting for the mayor to refuse. Luckily, he got up and walked out. He resumed after the mayor left. We found evidence that the girl was awake up until she died. From the tests that we did on her, we found evidence that a rubber object was in her mouth and appears to have been held in place by straps wrapped around her head. It appears she was gagged by a ball gag to keep her quiet. Both her wrists and ankles showed signs of being restrained. Her left arm was broken in a way we think was caused by her extreme efforts to escape. He stopped and took a breath. Something very large was inserted in her. The pain must have been excruciating, but that's not what killed her. She died from a blow or blows to her chest that broke her sternum and burst her heart. I was sitting there when I remembered what Jenny had told me, but when his hand touched my face, his other hand punched me right in my chest. I couldn't breathe. They thought that was really funny. I think this was done by my serial killer. Looks like he's escalated, Percy said quietly. I then spent the next 90 minutes telling Jenny's story and answering all questions. When I was all done, one of the FBI guys declared, "Looks like we've got one. A really nasty one." I left the meeting thinking that my day couldn't get any worse, when I remembered that I had to return my ex's call. Why did I promise Jenny I'd stop drinking? I thought. I checked the time difference because my ex-wife had moved to the West Coast. Then I remembered that she was the one who moved away from here, taking my children with her with no consideration about how it affected me. I dialed her number. As luck would have it, I didn't wake her up. She was already up. "What do you want?" I said as a greeting. It took her a moment to recognize my voice. "I want you to take your son to live with you," she replied. "Screw you." And I hung up the phone. It had been about 13 years since she left with my kids. I never had any contact with them since she left. Oh, I tried. I sent cards, letters, presents for their birthdays and Christmas. I telephoned. She kept changing her number every time I tried. After a few years, I just got tired of trying and stopped. Now she wanted me to take my son? No. "Hi, how are you? How have you been? Stick it up your butt." Nothing but a demand. She divorced me and took the kids, not the other way around. And now she was demanding something. Well, it would be a cold day in hell, I was thinking when my cell rang. "Percy?" My ex-wife asked. "What about screw you, don't you understand?" I asked before I hung up again. She called again. I hung up again. This went on for about the next 15 minutes. I guess I must have gotten a little loud because my captain was out of his office and standing before me saying, "God damn it, Percy, talk to her." I answered the phone the next time it rang. "Hurry up. You're using up my cell minutes." "Well, a hole. Stop hanging up and I'll explain," she replied. And explain she did. It seemed my son at 15 stopped being the loving son and started becoming the juvenile delinquent he was now. She couldn't control him anymore and was threatening to send him to me when he was arrested by the police. My son had told the judge that he wanted to live with his father and not his bitch of a mother. The judge said if I accepted my son, then she would suspend the sentence. If I didn't accept the child or the child was arrested or ran away, my son would spend until he was 21 in a juvenile facility. "Does our son know I'm a cop?" I asked, and a real hard ass? "Maybe," was the answer I got. "What do you mean, maybe?" I asked. "Well, he has a 20-year-old picture of you from your graduation from police academy. was the reply I got. Well, tell him the truth, I screamed, and call me back with the answer. That night I told Jenny about the phone call and my ex-wife's request at dinner. About 2 hours later, Jenny said, I think it's a good idea for him to live here, and besides I'd like the company. About midnight the phone woke me up. I expected it to be another homicide, so I answered, yeah. Dad, said a tentative voice on the other end. I looked at the caller ID and it showed me a West Coast number. Todd? I asked. Hi, Dad. Mom said she called you? I heard. Yeah, and I'm thinking about it, I replied. Please, Dad, can I come home? I'll be really good. I'll even get a job to pay for my upkeep. Shit, I thought. My son sounded desperate. Well, I guess we could try it for a while. If it doesn't work, there's always the juvenile center as a backup. Thanks, Dad. When can I come back? I'll be very good, you'll see, was his answer. As soon as your mother and the judge work it out, was my answer. About a week later, my desk phone rang. I answered as my usual charming self. Yeah, Detective Holmes. Judge Sanchez, Oregon State Juvenile Court speaking, was the reply. How may I help you, Your Honor? I politely asked. I heard laughter on the other end. Now that we've established the pecking order, I'm calling about your son, she replied. Your Honor, I'm a homicide detective, and most of the people who call me on this number are not your most outstanding citizens, or are people calling to increase my workload. I'm sorry I snapped at you, I said as humbly as possible. Well, I wanted to talk to you about your son before I make up my mind as to his sentence. Do you work with children? She asked. Your Honor, in my line of work, I only see the kids just before the coroner gets them. I try and find their killers to stop the body count, I answered sadly. I understand. Are you working on anything that would stop you from flying out and picking up your son? She asked. The case is confidential and I can't talk about it, but I can tell you that I'm on a task force with the feds, the state boys, the county boys, and my guys, I answered truthfully. I see. I hate serial killers also, was her answer. I started to protest, but she stopped me by saying, I didn't say anything about serial killers, did I? Do you expect to have the case closed quickly? She asked. The case is still under investigation and I don't have a timeline for it, I said. I'll arrange transport. Your work is too important, was her answer. After her phone call to Detective Holmes, she was a little conflicted. When he answered the phone, he sounded like a typical, hard-ass cop, not wanting to be disturbed. His voice conveyed a feeling of power and no nonsense. The fact that he was assigned to a serial killer task force impressed her. Now just any cop worked those cases. They only assign the very best. She was conflicted about him. She had had her clerk check him out, and all the reports came back positive. She had a choice: send the kid to juvenile center or ship him across the country to a father he never really knew. Returning the boy to his mother was out of the question. The mother was a drug addict and part-time prostitute. It was from his mother that he was running. Later that afternoon, she made her decision and signed the papers. He was his father's problem now, but she had taken a little liking to the boy and hoped her would straighten out. She made a mental note to follow up on the boy. A couple weeks later, my phone rang, and I was asked if I could meet a certain flight number at a certain time and sign for a prisoner. What's the prisoner's name? I inquired. Todd Holmes. I'll be there, was my answer. Being a cop and at the airport for a prisoner exchange, I got to bypass all the TSA bullshit. I was shown to a locked room and asked for my ID and the prisoner's name and flight number. I was told that the prisoner would be brought to me when the flight arrived so I could exchange the paperwork. It took about an hour, and I was upset with the waiting when a perfectly average cop in plain clothes entered the room. He looked me up and down as if I wasn't worth his time. Of course, I was wearing the same suit I'd worn all week with a shirt and tie that didn't match. He, on the other hand, looked exactly as if he'd just stepped out of the pages of GQ. You Holmes? He asked. I showed him my ID and said, Detective Sergeant Holmes, officer. Excuse me, sir. I'll have my partner bring in the prisoner, he replied. I was amazed. 2 cops to transport a 15-year-old boy. When in walked the partner and my son. My son was in handcuffs and leg chains. The handcuffs were fastened to a leather belt around his waist. The leg chains ran up to the belt with the effect of keeping him hobbled and making him almost unable to walk. I looked into my son's eyes and he had been crying. I looked at the 2 plainclothes cops and asked, how many people did he kill to require all the iron? I picked up the paperwork and began leafing through it. Yes, I said, driving without a license. I guess that's a capital crime in Oregon, I sarcastically replied. Get him out of those chains while I sign the receipt. I was pissed. Aren't you going to restrain him? Asked one of the officers. I can handle a 15-year-old kid without the irons, was all I said. but the sarcasm in my voice said much, much more. I pointed my son to one of the chairs while I finished the paperwork. At one point, I looked at my son and asked, "Thirsty?" When he nodded yes, I gave him a couple of dollar ones and pointed out the vending machine in the hall. I figured now was as good as any to start building some trust between us. And I'd go first. The two cops almost grabbed for him as he went for the door, but thought better of it when they looked at my face. I tossed them their paperwork and walked out the door, slamming it shut behind me. It automatically locked them in. Holes, I thought. Serves them right. My son was slowly drinking his soda, watching me with a small smile on his face. "They didn't let me have anything to drink since breakfast," he said. Then he looked at me and said, "My mom said my dad was a real hard-nosed cop. Are you him?" I smiled. "Let's go somewhere and get acquainted, son." Thus began another chapter in my life. The three of us spent the next couple of months getting to know each other. Jenny and Todd bonded like a brother and sister. While Jenny was older than Todd, she looked to him for guidance and direction. Todd, on the other hand, substituted Jenny for his missing sister. I gently probed about his relationship with his sister and his mother. I was met with nothing but a stone silence. The judge looked at her calendar and realized it was time to check up on the cop's son. She was toying with the idea of having her clerk call when she remembered how the father sounded on the phone. His voice generated feelings she hadn't had since her husband did. She found herself dialing his work number. One afternoon, I got a phone call from Judge Sanchez. She was checking up on Todd. We had a nice chat. I explained that Todd was no problem at all. There were no signs that he was backsliding to his former self. "I thought so," was her answer. Before I could question her, she continued, "Todd was rebelling against his mother's lifestyle. She is slowly spiraling down to her own personal cesspool. She drinks to excess and does drugs. Every night she has a new man in her bed. Is there any doubt in your mind that your son might rebel? I'm going to call Todd and talk to him. I'm not asking permission, just telling you how it's going to be," she stated. I liked her style. She appeared as tough as I was. "Go ahead," I replied. "If you find out anything I should know, call me anytime." I gave her my home phone number. We parted friends. Over the next few months, the judge called and spoke to Todd. At first, he was apprehensive about the calls, and we had long talks about her calling. The day after Todd spoke to the judge, she called me, and we discussed her call and Todd's responses. We worked out that he was telling her the truth and slowly opening up to her. During one of her phone calls, she asked, "Who's Jenny? A girlfriend? She sounds as if she's way too young for you." I stuttered while I explained about Jenny. It took me about an hour to cover all the facts and what the task force was doing. At the end, I made the judge promise to keep it all confidential. It was quiet on the other end of the line for a long time. When the judge finally sighed, "Jesus Christ, you really are a nice guy. Have you had any luck normalizing her?" "No," I replied, "but Todd and Jenny have developed a bond of sorts. Not as boyfriend/girlfriend, but more like brother and sister." The phone got quiet, and I could almost hear the judge thinking, "Let me see what I can find out about your daughter. I feel that she should be with you too." When Judge Sanchez said that you could have knocked me over with a feather, I thanked her and said any help would be appreciated. While we were getting Todd incorporated into our lives, Jenny's brain was being picked dry by the task force. They realized how fragile she was, so they used very low-key approach. They brought a doctor from the behavioral science unit at Quantico in to talk to her. The talks went on for months, each revealing a little more information. Finally, there was a breakthrough. From all her sessions, they were able to locate the farm where she was kept. The FBI took it over and kept everyone away until their technicians had gone over the place with a fine-tooth comb. They found 28 unmarked graves on the property. The bodies showed signs of torture and mutilation. I guess you could say they hit the jackpot, but no one felt that way. They wanted to get this man too badly. The task force went out to the house to familiarize themselves with the site. I was riding in my car with my Capitan. We didn't talk much going out there. We were both lost in our thoughts. Mine were remembering all the horrors Jenny described to me about her years locked in that basement. They were terrible times. She was kept nude locked in a darkened basement room. She was fed once a day and given enough water to last her about one day. Her toilet facilities consisted of a metal grate over a hole in the floor. Water flowed at the bottom of the hole, which carried her wastes away, keeping the smell at a minimum. She couldn't remember the number of times that it happened, but she awoke to find herself bound and gagged and hoisted off the floor, suspended from a hook in the ceiling. She knew instinctively that she wasn't alone in the room. Suddenly, the lights would come on, and she would find another person hanging next to her. It usually was a man. The man was dirty and usually smelled. He was nude. He was also bound and gagged. Sometimes it was a woman next to her. Whether a man or woman, they all had that homeless look about them. They were scared. You could see it in their eyes, the helplessness and terror visible in their eyes. Jenny had described how master and mistress entered the room. They were both dressed in black leather outfits. The outfits revealed mistress's female parts, leaving no doubt that she was a woman with an exceptional body. Master wore only leather briefs and a hood showing only his eyes. His nose and mouth were covered. Percy spotted the truck stop from which Jenny made her escape to his city. She responded to a truck driver's command to get in. She was so conditioned by her captives, she followed orders with no forethought. She was lucky that the truck driver was a decent guy and only wanted to give her a ride. Looking at her clothing and into her eyes, the truck driver knew that she needed help, but he didn't understand just how much help she really needed. He just assumed she was another runaway. Percy returned to his thoughts about the farmhouse. He remembered Jenny telling him that mistress gave all the commands and master never spoke. Master just wheeled the covered cart into the room. Mistress carried a whip. She was the one who told the captive everything she was going to do to them. The captive would twist and turning trying to get away. Mistress would only laugh at the efforts. She would order master to get the fire hose and clean him. Master did. The hose had high pressure and spun him around and around. Master would point the water spray at his genitals. The poor creature would just scream in pain. Jenny said that the cold water would splash on her and she'd shiver. She'd hang there trying to turn off the sounds and the visions of what was happening. If she closed her eyes to block out the actions next to her, mistress would order master to turn the hose on her so that she remembered to keep her eyes open. When mistress tired of the fire hose game, she would start the whipping. She timed she strokes for the maximum pain. As soon as the victim would stop screaming from the last stroke, she'd hit him again, the whip cutting into his skin and leaving bloody stripes. Eventually, the victim would pass out from the pain. She'd have master hold something under his nose until he awoke. Then she'd start up with the whip again. She kept this up for hours, only stopping when her arms were too tired to swing the whip anymore. Mistress and master would leave the room to rest. They would leave the victim and Jenny hanging there. Jenny usually covered in the victim's blood that was splashed on her by the whip, the victim just hanging in pain, softly moaning. When the torturers returned, the first thing was to hose off Jenny and the victim. It wasn't so much as to clean them, but to get both of them fully awake. Mistress would then declare that now the fun was to begin. Master would uncover the cart and show the victim what was on it. It contained instruments of torture. Master would pick up each device and mistress would explain its purpose. The victim would usually urinate from the fear that mistress was invoking in him. She would laugh at this exhibition of fear. Then she'd tell master to cut the offending organ off so the victim could not foul up the floor again. Master would obey her command. If it was a man, emasculating the victim slowly. If it was a woman, he'd clamp something between her legs so she couldn't urinate. They usually made the torture last for at least 2 days, measured by her sleep cycle and her daily meals. They would leave the lights on so that she could watch the victim hang there. She knew when they were all done with their victim, because they started cutting off his arms and legs. They had a torch to seal his arms and legs so that he would not die due to blood loss. They put the blood-covered organs around me and on me. They left both of us hanging there, the victim taking his last breaths and me silently screaming in my mind. We arrived at the farm and the FBI conducted the tour. It started in the hidden basement room where they had found the badly decomposed body of a woman. The coroner explained that the cause of death was blunt force trauma to the head, probably resulting from a fall, and her head being repeatedly smashed on the floor. We all agreed that this damage was probably caused by Jenny trying to escape. The coroner then added, "It also appears that she was assaulted after she was killed. Whoever did this to her was a real animal." We all remembered Jenny's descriptions of master's organ. One of the guys said, "The sick creeps assaulted his dead sister." I looked around the room that Jenny was kept in. It was large, approximately 12 by 24. It was completely finished in white tile, like a butcher shop. I thought, how fitting. The room had a metal track suspended from the ceiling. It had hooks hanging from it. Again, just like in a butcher shop. I looked at the setup and just imagined the poor souls hanging from those hooks being slowly dismembered. My mind could hear the screams of the dying. I don't know what the others were thinking, but I know it was very quiet in that room. I could see the floor drain exactly as Jenny described it. That was her bathroom for years. I could see the fire hose on the wall. This was how the killers cleaned up the room and Jenny after their sessions. My eyes started to tear up and I left the room. One of the FBI guys followed me out. "Don't worry, we'll get him," was all he said as his voice broke. We stood there and hugged each other for a long time. a couple of hard men losing it. That night I hugged Ginny extra hard and extra long. At the next task force meeting, the feds brought us up to date on master and mistress. Their names were Agnes and Jermaine Jones. She was a doctor of physiology. He was her brother. She had inherited the farm when their parents died. They both lived here. They had no other living relatives. Agnes was a known lesbian, but she was not in any kind of permanent relationship. A canvas of her previous lover revealed that while she was technically good in bed, there was something always missing. None of her lovers could ever form a bond with her. They agreed that she was a control freak, not a loving partner. Her bedroom was normal until you opened the closet. It had a false door in the back which opened into another closet. In the second closet was all her fetish gear. It contained all sorts of leather outfits and whips. The equipment was tested for the presence of blood and found positive. The articles were taken to the FBI lab to be tested for DNA. The lab boys were like little kids at Christmas over this find. They promised to have a preliminary report in a couple of weeks. Jermaine's bedroom was completely different. It was more of a cell than a room. The only door locked from the outside. There was no way to open it from the inside. There was a mattress on the floor. It had no bedding or blankets. It was just a mattress. The closet held a couple of pair of overalls and one pair of leather underwear. There was a barred window in the room. Some of the bars were removed and the window was broken from the inside. The technician explained that it looked as if he torn out the bars and escaped out the window. He said that Jermaine must be very strong because of the force required to tear out the bars. I thought about it and decided I would get a bigger caliber gun, maybe a .50 caliber, the equivalent of a human elephant gun. I didn't plan on capturing this one alive. I resolved to put him down like a mad dog. This was one guy who didn't deserve to live. I looked around the room. Some of the guys were looking at their .38s or their 9mm. I'll bet they were thinking the same thought as I was. The task force adjourned their meeting. I went back to my desk to work on another murder case I had caught a few days ago. A husband had caught his wife in bed with another man. I had it pegged as a double homicide and a suicide. All I was waiting for was the report from the coroner and the CSIs. When the CSI report came in, I was correct in my assumption. The text proved that the wife and her boyfriend were in the throes of sex when they were shot by the husband. The first bullet hit the boyfriend in the crotch, basically emasculating him. The bullet continued through him and entered her leg, severing the femoral artery. The second shot was to the back of the lover's head. The bullet entered his brain and killed him instantly. The bullet then exited through his forehead and lodged in the wife's forehead. The bullet was spent and did not have enough energy to break her skull. The cause of death was blood loss from her severed artery. She bled to death with her dead lover's body trapping her under him, Percy thought. The report had indicated that the husband died from a single gunshot to the head. All indications are that it was a self-inflicted gunshot. From the other reports, it appeared that the husband killed himself about 10 minutes after shooting the two lovers on the bed. Percy guessed that the husband watched his wife bleed to death before taking himself out. He wrote up the paperwork and sent everything to the DA. Judge Sanchez finished reading the report on Tara Holmes, Detective Holmes's missing daughter. While it didn't exactly contain any good news, it didn't contain any really bad news either. She had mixed feelings about the report. It could be interpreted in one of two ways. She had better talk to Percy herself. Suddenly she thought, when did I start thinking of him as Percy? It should be Detective Holmes. She picked up her phone and started dialing. His phone rang. It was Judge Sanchez. Detective Holmes, I've got some news about your daughter, she began. It looks as if she ran away from home and just disappeared. Any idea why? He asked. It seems that your wife had a series of lovers. She was using gifts from them to supplement her meager income as a waitress. One night, one of her mother's friends broke down your daughter's door to her bedroom. He was pretty drunk, and your daughter was able to knock him out with a lamp before he was able to accomplish his goal. Percy never said a word. The judge continued, Detective Holmes, are you there? Yeah. She was okay when she ran. I put a couple of good investigators on the case. They have found no indication she has been killed. No Jane Doe bodies matching her have turned up. The only thing they can find is that she bought one of those unlimited travel bus passes and got on a Greyhound heading east. Thanks, I guess, was his reply. At least your son is safe. I'll let you know if anything turns up about your daughter, she continued. Percy, I put Vice on your ex. They'll get her if she's hooking. By the way, I understand she has a drug habit. Is there anything you want to do if we catch her dirty? Throw the book at her. As he hung up, he realized that she had called him Percy for the first time. He kinda liked it. When he got home that night, he pulled all Todd's paperwork out of his files. Maria, she had a nice first name. He wondered if she was in a relationship of any kind. Shit, am I stupid? Of course she's in a relationship. No one that thoughtful would ever be passed over, he concluded. Another month went by, and because there was no movement on the serial killer, the task force was disbanded. It looked as if Jermaine had left the area since there were no further killings or disappearances of homeless people. The case now became the FBI's problem. We closed out our records and filed everything as a cold case. I hoped it would stay that way. My son had turned 16 during this mess, and I wanted to make it a special birthday for him. He had been doing well in school. All his teachers were pleased with the effort he put in his schoolwork trying to catch up his peers. They said he was succeeding. The judge and I had our usual phone chat. This time I asked her if my son had indicated there was anything he really wanted for his birthday. He's a 16-year-old boy. What did you want at 16? She asked. I thought, sex, a driver's license, and more sex? A driver's license? I replied. The judge laughed. What about sex? She asked. After she stopped laughing, she said, he told me about your apartment. It's only 2 bedrooms and 1 bathroom. Jenny has her room, Todd sleeps in your room, and you sleep in a chair, correct? Well, sort of. I do sleep on the couch every once in a while. Well, a hole. It sounds as if you need a bigger place in a better neighborhood, was her reply. I was starting to like her. She was straight talking. Too bad she was a judge. The next day, I called a real estate attorney I knew to get a recommendation for a real estate agent. Hi, Percy, was his reply when he finally came on the line. What can I do for you? I'm looking for a real estate agent so I can purchase a house. I need someone I can trust, I answered. We chatted a while about my needs and why I needed a home in a good neighborhood. He interrupted me and said that he had another call he had to take from a paying client, and he'd get right back to me. He called back about 4 hours later, just as I was starting to leave for the day. Percy, I think I have just the place for you. I'm representing an estate where there are no living relatives. He began. I think I can put you in the house for about half what it's worth. It's also completely furnished. He gave me the address, where the key was hidden, and asked that I get back to him in a few days. When I got home, I grabbed Todd and Jenny and said we were going out to dinner. I lied. We were going to look at the house. I explained to the kids that I had to stop and inspect some property for a buddy at work. The kids were very quiet as we drove in the neighborhood. They wanted to know how rich a person had to be to live here. When I pulled in the driveway, it got really quiet in the car. All 3 of us just sat there with our mouths open. The house had to be worth at least $300,000. I was ready to turn around and drive away when the kids convinced me to go inside. I got the key out of its hiding place and in we went. The kids were ecstatic about the house. They were all over the inside until they discovered the pool and hot tub in the rear yard. While they were exploring, I called the lawyer at home. Are you out of your mind? I yelled. He broke up. You can get it for about $100,000 fully furnished. I told you it was an estate sale. All the proceeds just go to the state anyway. Seriously? I asked. Yeah, I'll run it by the probate judge tomorrow, he replied and then hung up. As I turned to tell the kids, I noticed a local uniformed cop in the doorway. He started with the questions before I showed him my badge. What's a homicide detective doing here? He asked. The kids were looking a little nervous as I stood there. How'd you know I was in homicide? I asked. You caught the guy that killed my sister's husband. She's a Starbucks manager now. Well, I see your sister all the time. She's a nice lady. But to answer your unsaid question, I'm putting in an offer to buy this house. The kids went wild. The officer just smiled and turned and left. It took me about another hour before the kids would leave. They already had divided up the bedrooms, picked their favorite colors, and explained everything to me. I told them that we didn't own the house yet. It was up to a judge to accept my offer. All through the ride to the diner, through dinner, and on the drive back home, I heard nothing but their plans for their new house. This was the first time since I met her that Jenny got really excited about anything. When we got back home, Todd called Oregon and left a message on the judge's answering machine. From the length of the call, I'll bet he used up all her tape. For the next week, you can guess what the kids talked about. The estate lawyer called me. The probate judge would like us in his chambers at 3 p.m. tomorrow. Be there, was his message. So there I was in my best suit and shine shoes waiting outside the judge's chambers. His clerk called my name and invited me in the judge's chambers. I walked in and found my attorney and the judge sitting and making small talk. Welcome to my chambers, Detective Holmes. I understand you'd like to purchase a house. Yes, sir, I replied. Do you understand that the house is appraised at $325,000? Yes, sir, I replied. Do you have that kind of money? No, sir, I replied. Do you remember Fred and Mary Opus? They are distant relatives, he stated. Yes, sir. Because of the kindness you showed toward them and how far out of your way to prove their innocence you went, I'll accept $50,000 for the estate. When can you give me a check? The lawyer piped up, I just happen to have a certified for that exact amount in my briefcase. Done, he exclaimed as he signed some papers. Here are the deed and title. You are now a homeowner, he said as he handed me paperwork. It took a while before I realized that I was a homeowner. I had just purchased a $325,000 house for $50,000, and it was all perfectly legal. I left the office with my head in a cloud. My attorney reminded me that I owed him $50,000, but he knew I was good for it. When I got home, I told the kids to get packed. We were spending the night in our new house. I never saw them move so fast in their lives. We were out of the house in less than an hour. I told them I'd rent a truck over the weekend and we'd move the rest. The next morning, I called into work and took the day off. My Capitan sounded funny about the day off until I gave him my new address and explained about the house. He gave me the rest of the week off to get situated. I spent the rest of the day doing all those things you do when you buy a new house. I ended up last at motor vehicles to change my address on the car registration and the driver's license. I also picked up some additional paperwork. I swung by the new house and dropped off all the paperwork I had accumulated all day before swinging back to the apartment to pick up the kids. Jenny had been busy while I was out. She had packed boxes of stuff that needed to be taken to the new house. Todd and I loaded up the car with as much as we could get in it. I'd better rent a truck tomorrow, I thought. When we got to the new house, Jenny pointed out some boxes that she wanted in the kitchen. Todd and I followed orders and put them in the kitchen first and went back to unloading the car. Each box was labeled as to what room to put it. Todd and I worked for another half hour putting every box in the right room before starting to unpack them. Todd was working on his room when I heard him yell. Jenny came out of the kitchen with a worried look on her face. I hushed her, and we waited at the bottom of the stairs for Todd to come running down. And running he came, waving the paperwork and telling me and anyone else within earshot I was the greatest dad in the whole wide world. I guess he found the application for learner's permit and the driving manual. Jenny realized what I'd done and started grinning from ear to ear. I got a hug from her. Suddenly, she remembered what she was doing in the kitchen and hurriedly left the room. Todd plopped down in a chair and began reading the booklet. Jenny called me from the kitchen and asked my help. When I got there, I found that she was cooking our first meal in the new house. I helped set the table and serve the food. We were acting like a family for the first time. I liked it. That night, we each slept in our own bedrooms. The next day, I rented a truck, and we started packing up our things in the old apartment. It took all day, but we managed to get everything moved. That afternoon, I found my son in his new room rereading the driver's manual for the third or fourth time. Dad, could you or Jenny quiz me on this information? There are sample questions in the back? He asked. I just smiled and nodded yes. While Todd and I were taking a break from the driver's manual, I looked in Jenny's room and found her sitting on the bed crying softly. I sat next to her on the bed and took her hand. She crumpled into my chest, and the tears started flowing. As I held her, I asked, "Want to talk?" I felt her shake her head, no, against my chest. We just sat that way until my son wandered in. When he saw what was happening, he sat on the other side of her. "It's all right now, sis. He's here for us forever. They'll never hurt you again," he said, taking her hand. He called her sis. I guess they worked out their relationship, two lonely kids who decided that they were a family. I untangled myself and went downstairs to fix dinner. Before I had gotten to the point of no return, the two of them walked into the kitchen and told me to change clothes because we were going out to dinner on them. I left the kitchen and went to my room and changed. When I returned, the kitchen was restored to a cleaner state, and the two of them were in the family room. Jenny was quizzing Todd on the driver's manual. I listened for a few minutes. Todd was answering the questions better and faster than I could. I asked the kids if they were ready to leave. Todd asked if he could start the car and warm it up. "I'll make sure he does it correctly," Jenny stated. The now defeated dad answered, "Okay, 2 against 1 was just unfair." After we returned from dinner, we spent the second night in our new home. I don't know about the kids, but I was tired from all the moving and slept like a rock. It was nice to sleep in a bed again. I just wished I wasn't sleeping alone. But with 2 young adults in the house, I'd need to find someplace else to take friends with benefits, as if I actually had one. At breakfast the next morning, I reminded Todd that we needed to get him enrolled in his new school and his records transferred from the old school. Jenny got really quiet as Todd and I discussed schooling. I looked at her, realizing why she was quiet, and said, "And you, young lady, we need to find out what you need to finish to graduate so you can enroll in community college." I was attacked by a very happy girl. "You're the best dad a girl could want," was all she said. I guess I did good. We took off after cleaning up the kitchen for the local high school. The three of us walked into the school office and I explained what we were there for to the school secretary. Please take a seat, and I'll inform the principal you're here. I took my jacket off and sat down. I forgot I was wearing my gun. The secretary's eyes got very big. Oops, I said. I forgot. I'm a detective from the city and we're required to be armed all the time. I put my jacket back on. A few minutes later, I spotted my local police officer entering the office. He took one look at me and smiled. Hi, Detective Holmes. I see you're getting the kids transferred to our little school. He nodded to the secretary and left. We were escorted into the principal's office. The man behind the desk stood and said, "Sorry about the wait, but we needed to check you out. We take the children in our school. Safety, very important." I nodded. I was used to this caution when people spotted my gun. He continued, "That's a .50 cal Desert Eagle, isn't it?" I nodded. "A little large for your business, isn't it?" I remembered the name sign on his office door. Dr. Canfield. I've been a homicide detective for 20 years. In all those years, regretfully, I have had to use my gun. I carry the large caliber weapon because if I need to shoot someone, I want them to stay shot. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw Todd and Jenny's eyes get really big. "I understand," replied Dr. Canfield. We changed the subject to Todd. Dr. Canfield talked to him about his academic history. At one point, he called a guidance counselor in who took Todd for some testing. Dr. Canfield started asking Jenny about her high school and where she was attending college. Jenny broke down in tears. Dr. Canfield looked at me with real compassion in his eyes. "Dr. Canfield, Jenny was kidnapped 2 months before her high school graduation and was held captive for 3 years before escaping," I explained. "We are here to see what is required to complete her high school education so that she can enroll in community college." He looked at me with concern. "Her parents were murdered by the kidnappers, and I'm her guardian even though she's over 21. I continued. "Did you capture her kidnappers?" he asked. "Only one," I answered. "That's why I carry a bigger gun." He then turned to Jenny and started asking her questions about her old school and courses. When they finished talking, he said to me, "The superintendent of that system is an old friend of mine. I'll contact him and see if we can speed things up. The next session at the local community college starts in 6 weeks, and I'd like to see her start on time." Jenny's face lit up like a small child at Christmas. Todd picked this time to return from the guidance office. He was the proud processor of an armful of paperwork. He gave me a small stack and said, "Dad, you need to sign on the X's where marked." He then started to discuss with Jenny his new class schedule. He was one excited kid. A student guide was escorted into the office. She was a little cutie about Todd's age. "I've been sent to take you around and show you stuff," she said. "It's my lunch period. Do you want to start in the cafeteria?" Pointing at Jenny, she added, "Your sister can come too." I wasn't asked for permission, only for some money to use to buy lunch. Dr. Canfield just laughed. "Don't feel bad. That's how loving children treat their parents." After everybody left, and it was just Canfield and me, he asked, "I noticed you said that you carried the larger caliber gun because it had more stopping power. Is that stopping power needed to protect Jenny from her kidnapper?" "Doc, the kidnapper is a very large guy." "I see. Do we have any worries here at the school?" he asked. "You always have worries about these perps, but the feds feel the kidnapper has escaped from this area and is in hiding somewhere else," was all I could say. Then I added, "He's a real sick SOB. We found 28 bodies buried on his farm, all of them tortured to death. We'll get him someday, but don't let this information leave the room. It might cause a panic." "I wouldn't want your job for all the money in the world," was his response. I agreed, because I sometimes felt as if the weight of the world was on my shoulders. We chatted for the next hour until the kids came back. When we got back to our new home, I called a retired police officer I had served with. After his retirement, he had started a security firm. He and I talked, and it was decided to install a state-of-the-art alarm system at the new house. The work would begin on Monday. While I was talking to the security firm, my home phone kept beeping at me. I had never had call waiting before, so I didn't recognize the signal. As soon as I hung up my call, the phone started ringing. "Yeah," I said. "Don't you ever answer your phone? And haven't you learned a polite greeting yet?" Judge Sanchez said. "Try hello," she continued. "Let me talk to Todd. He's been filling up my answering machine for the last 3 days." I yelled up to Todd that the phone was for him and made small talk with the judge until he picked up his bedroom extension. I later learned that they talked for over an hour as he brought her up to date. The three of us went grocery shopping. I ended up with a full refrigerator, pantry, and empty wallet. I guess this was one of the other advantages of being a homeowner. When we got back home, there was a message for me to call the desk sergeant. I called in. "I got another case. This time my new case was in a dance club near an upscale neighborhood. When I pulled up outside, there were the usual police vehicles, coroner's wagon, CSI vehicles, and of course television and other news vehicles. It looked like a regular party. When I pulled up, I was recognized by the news media and suddenly the star of the party. Before I could walk 10 feet, they were all over me. "Detective, any statement? Was it a drug deal gone bad? A gang fight?" The questions kept coming. "Whoa," I yelled. "I just got here, remember? I'll make a statement as soon as I know something." As I walked over to the crime tape, I heard one of the TV reporters saying, "Well, folks, you just heard Detective Holmes. On background, he's the one who is assigned to all the really tough cases. He has a reputation for always solving his cases." His voice faded as I got farther away. "He has a reputation for always solving his cases, except the serial killer one," I thought as I walked toward a familiar face. "What have we got here, Captain?" I asked of the duty officer. He looked pissed. Here was a guy with about a year to go before retirement, getting caught in the middle of what looked like a very nasty murder. He didn't want to retire with this case being unsolved on his record. It looked bad if he was going to continue as some small town's police chief. This is what other senior officers did when they retired, and he planned on following the tradition. "Hi, Percy. We've got us a messy one. We have a known drug dealer, not low level but a boss. He was having drinks with some of his associates and their girlfriends when 2 or 3 or 4, eyewitness reports differ, opened up with automatic weapons, or maybe semi-automatic weapons. Again, eyewitness reports differ," he said. "Our eyewitnesses said the shooters were white or maybe black, or maybe Hispanic," he continued. "So far we have about 30 eyewitnesses to the shooting, and none of their information is worth a shit," he lamented. "Percy, I'd hate to be in your shoes now." "Me too," I replied. I set up a group of patrol officers to take down all the personal information and statements from all the eyewitnesses. I made sure that the officers kept them away from each other. I didn't want their stories discussed amongst themselves. If not kept separate, then all the eyewitness accounts would be tainted by each other's stories. The witnesses with the stronger personalities would dominate the weaker ones until all the stories sounded the same, not describing the situation, but reflecting the stronger personality. From all these eyewitness accounts, I hoped I could extract a common thread which might reflect what actually happened. My next stop was to visit with the technicians. The CSI guys looked at the facts of the crime scene, not the speculation of eyewitnesses. Eyewitnesses usually were too busy trying to stay alive to notice anything important. "Looks as if there was a shooting here," joked one of the techs. "No shit," I replied. "Explain it to me." They sobered up because of my attitude and started walking me through the crime scene. They said it appears that there were 2 shooters using machine guns. The shooters stood at right angles to the victim's table and fired about 100 rounds. The majority of the rounds hit our victim's table and its occupants. There was some collateral damage. 3 people at adjacent tables were killed by the shooters. 2 people were killed on the dance floor by rounds fired by the victims trying to defend themselves from the shooters. There were 12 wounded again by bullets fired by either the shooters of their victims. They wouldn't be sure until the rounds were removed from the wounded, and the wounded people's locations in the club were determined when the shooting took place. They promised me a preliminary report in a couple of days. My next stop was the coroner's team. There I was told that it looked as if the victims all died from multiple gunshot wounds. Everybody's a comedian, I thought. "Can you guys add anything useful?" I asked. "Not until we get them back to the morgue and start cutting," was my answer. I walked around the scene for the next few hours. I was just killing time until the deadlines for all the news guys had passed. Then I held my press conference. "Hi guys," I began. "I don't have a lot to tell you yet. There were 13 people killed and 12 wounded by what looks like the actions of 2 shooters with machine guns. Some of the dead or wounded were caught in the crossfire between the 2 factions. I have no names for you of the dead or wounded because we are still notifying the next of kin. It is too early to give you any reasons or motives for these killings. I'll be holding additional news briefings as more facts come out. Please don't speculate in your reporting. Your job is to report the facts." I spent the next 30 minutes answering their questions. Most of the questions were good, but some were really, really dumb. I guess that some of the reporters were hired because they looked good on camera. There was one female TV reporter that made the dumb blondes of the world look like rocket scientists.